Well, welcome to the Book Festival. This morning I'm going to be talking to you about our Thomas Jefferson Building and a little bit of history about why we have a Library of Congress. So our first slide that I'm going to bring up is going to show you what Washington, D.C. looked like in 1800 when they moved the capital or the federal city from Philadelphia to Washington. Very rural, pasture land, not a whole lot going on. Now, Old Town Alexandria was built up, and so was Georgetown, but right where the capital is going to be is still a very rural area. Now, the reason they moved the capital from Philadelphia to Washington is that some of the southern states thought it was too far for them to travel up to Philadelphia. So they decided to put the federal city in a more central location for all the states. So they put it in the middle of a swamp, literally, and which is always a great place to put your federal government. And in the next picture, you can see what the Capitol looked like. And originally, the Library of Congress was housed in the Capitol building. The first appropriation was for $5,000 to start a Library of Congress, because in Philadelphia, it was a very metropolitan area. They had libraries, they had university libraries, they had private libraries, they had public libraries. Washington, D.C. did not have a library. And of course, Congress was going to need a library to refer to. So they started their own library as the Congressional Library housed in the Capitol building. That went well until the War of 1812. In 1814, the British came to Washington, destroyed the Capitol building, and destroyed White House and many other buildings. Now, a part of that story that we always tend to leave out of our history books is that the American troops had gone to York the year before, which is present-day Toronto, and burned all of the British holdings there. So War of 1812 was in retaliation for that. All the books in the library were destroyed in that fire. They were shooting rockets from the port into the roof of the Capitol, and everything was set ablaze. So the library was completely destroyed. At that time, Thomas Jefferson had the largest private library in the country, and he offered to sell it to Congress for any price they deemed reasonable. Now, these 6,487 books that Jefferson was selling were on all subjects. There were books on beekeeping, lace making, the harpsichord. There were books in 14 other languages other than English. But there were also books on philosophy, statehood, poetry. And eventually, after 6 months of bipartisan debate, only 6 months of bipartisan debate, they did decide to purchase Thomas Jefferson's books. Now, there's not an antiquarian book market in Washington at the time, so they have to figure out how they're going to decide how much his books are worth. So they do it by size. Largest books are worth $10, next books are worth $8, $6, $2, $1, down to pamphlets and maps. So that's how they came to the round figure of $23,950. So Jefferson's books come up from Monticello, and they are housed at the Blodgett's Hotel, which is the temporary headquarters for the Capitol building. Thomas Jefferson organizes his books on how he believes we come to human understanding, and that's through 3 parts of our mind. First part is memory. So that's history, biographies, history of the world, history of nature. Second part is our reasoning skills: science, philosophy, math, religion, law. And the last section is imagination, all of the fine arts. The Library of Congress kept Jefferson's collecting practices and classification system for over 100 years. So we kept collecting like he did. So today, the Library of Congress actually has materials in 470 different languages. Things go along pretty well. We have Jefferson's books as a basis. They grow ever so slightly. And then, unfortunately, in 1851, another fire strikes. This fire destroys 35,000 of the library's 55,000 collection at the time, including 2/3 of Thomas Jefferson's books. So 2 fires, 2 times. Once it was completely destroyed, other time 2/3 was destroyed. So basically, Congress and the librarian decide, we're just going to have a very conservative period here for a little while. We're just not going to collect a lot. We're going to try and replace what was lost, but we're not going to grow the library during this time. So as we move forward from 1851 to 1864, the library doesn't grow very much at all until this man comes on the scene. Ainsworth Rand Spofford becomes the 4th employee of the Library of Congress in 1864. And he does some amazing things. One of the first things he does is he works with the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian, for a while, people were trying to push it towards being our national library. The Smithsonian eventually decides that's not under their collecting purview. They don't want to deal with a library. So their library comes from the Smithsonian to the Library of Congress, 40,000 volumes in 1866. He begins to purchase more books, including books on Americana, including a 22,000 item private library. And probably his greatest accomplishment that Ainsworth Rand Spofford did was to centralize the copyright law. Copyright law had been around since 1790, but it was all registered at district courts all around the country. What Spofford said was, let's centralize copyright at the Library of Congress. We can register all the copyrights, we'll keep track of all the copyrights, and if people send 2 copies of everything they're producing into the library, what a great way to grow our collections. So every photograph, well, not photographs then, well, daguerreotypes, but photographs, maps, architectural drawings, plays, books, articles start coming to the library for copyright protection. Today, the library includes about another 12,000 items every single business day into our collections, primarily through U.S. copyright. So they expand the building and in the Capitol, we're still in the Capitol, they're trying to make those rooms fireproof. They finally realize books burn really quickly and really easily. So they build this big, beautiful built room for the Library of Congress. It's supposed to be fireproof, at least very much fire resistant, and things are going well. Then that 1870 copyright becomes a reality, and the collection begins to grow. By I'm just going to pass by this. If anyone's really interested in reading the copyright law, go to copyright.gov, and it changes often. But this is the actual act that went through in 1870. So copyright, they start spilling out of the sides by 1871. Spofford at first tries to get them to expand the library in the Capitol, and then he realizes there's just never going to be enough room. We need our own building. So Spofford is a very wise man. And so what he does, and I think it's partially out of necessity, you can see the books stacked everywhere. He starts booby-trapping all the doors that the members of Congress use. So they open a door, a pile of books will fall on them. The books that congressmen want to use the most, they put them in the very, very back pile. So it takes them about an hour and a half to 2 hours to get to their book that they know they're going to want on a particular piece of legislation. So they have a architecture competition, and architects from around the country and a few from international places joined this competition in 1873. So I'm going to show you just a couple of images of what the Library of Congress could have looked like. Many of them are Italian Renaissance, cathedral-esque, so you can see just what the type of drawings that were entered into the competition. And this is the drawing that Smith, Meyer, and Pell's win with. So it looks very much like the Thomas Jefferson Building does today. Smith, Meyer, and Pell's. Smith, Meyer is more of the front guy. He's the seller. He's the business guy. And Pell's is the drawer. He's the real architect. He knows how things are going to work. Smith, Meyer is not moving forward as quickly as Congress wants them to, because Smith, Meyer has put in all of this building. The building itself today is made from 22 million bricks. It is then covered with 30,000 tons of New Hampshire granite on the outside. And then it's just covered with marble on the end. I'll show you an image later. But you can imagine the enormity of this building in a swamp and trying to get it to stand upright. They keep messing with the concrete, etc., and Congress starts to get incredibly frustrated with Smith, Meyer, and Pell's. And this is what Smith, Meyer, and Pell's, I've shown you some of the outside, this is what they were thinking that the inside of the building was actually going to look like. So it was highly decorated, even from those early drawings by Smith, Meyer, and Pell's. The building was to have 4 courtyards. And as you can see from the cross section, those are book stacks. They think they're not going to run out of room for at least 70 years. By 1910, they've filled in what would be our far upper right corner, that courtyard, and put in book stacks. They've run out of room. 1917, they take that other courtyard in the northwest corner, fill it in. Then they build the Coolidge Auditorium in the bottom left corner in 1925, and they have no more room. They have 1 courtyard left. We still luckily have some light coming from that courtyard. So that's when they start to propose building the Adams Building, but you can see how quickly, they just could not imagine how quickly these collections would be coming into the building. So Congress, in its wisdom at the time, isn't really sure what it wants to do. So it holds another architecture competition, and they finally decide on the location where they will put the building. And it's a 10-acre plot of land directly across from the Capitol building on First Street, facing First Street southeast, and East Capitol Street and Independence Avenue. What they're going to have to tear down is this. This is the site where they're going to put the Library of Congress. And this is Carroll Row. Carroll Row is a group of townhouses where many of the members of Congress live when they're in the city, including Abraham Lincoln lived there during his first term in the U.S. House of Representatives. But they're able to secure this land and begin the building. And this is about how far they had gotten. I mentioned Smith, Meyer, hard time getting everything put together. They clear it, but nothing starts above ground. Congress begins to get really frustrated because all they see is the largest spittoon, as they called it at the time, that had ever been constructed. So they fire Smith, Meyer, and they bring in this gentleman. This gentleman is General Casey. Now, Thomas Lincoln Casey works for the Army Corps of Engineers. He has recently helped with the successful completion of the Washington Monument. So if he's able to get the Washington Monument, that giant obelisk, to work, he'll probably do pretty well on this building too. And he brings with him Bernard Green as his superintendent. Now, when Casey takes this position, he is made the head of the whole Army Corps of Engineers for the United States. So he's going off to all the bridges, dams, buildings that they're building, and it's really this gentleman, Superintendent Green, who keeps everything on track, keeps brilliant records, makes sure that everything is going the way that it should be. So things start to finally lift off the ground. So we can see a few of these pictures as the building and construction begins. And one of the things I just want to point out is, if you look at that very top layer, I mentioned the building was 22 million bricks. So that's essentially what they do, is they're building the steel and brick structure and then covering it with limestone, or excuse me, New Hampshire granite on the outside. Pels stayed on the project for another year, 2 years, because he was really the one who could read all the drawings and knew what had been drawn and what was expected. But eventually they fire Pels to one of the two original architects, and General Casey brings his son onto the job, Edward Pierce Casey. No nepotism there. So Edward Pierce Casey has been educated as an architect. He worked at the he graduated from the School de Beaux-Arts in Paris. He worked at McKim, Mead, and White, which is one of the top firms in New York City in the Beaux-Arts. And at the beginning, his father pays him himself. He does not put him on the rolls of the library because he does not want to be charged with nepotism. So Edward starts on the job and begins to change a little bit of what Smith Meyer and Pels had seen as their original interior. This caused a lot of problems and lawsuits, etc. So when you walk into the Library of Congress from the front door, when you look at the plaque above where it says Library of Congress, it's difficult to read, they actually added Edward Pierce Casey as one of the architects with Smith Meyer and Pels. And of course, Smith Meyer and Pels were not happy to have his name up there, but that's a whole nother lecture for a whole nother day, and a lot of drama. But while we're on this slide, I just wanted to point out a couple of things. Besides at the top where we recognize the building being built, Library of Congress, the two gentlemen over the arch are two of my favorite figures in the library. One is our young scholar and one is our more mature scholar, or our older scholar. It's a great way, especially with children and others, to just visualize that learning's not a process just while you're in school. It's a lifelong pursuit. So no matter how young you are, the apprentice on your left with the leather strap around his head, he has the scroll that he can wrap under his arm and travel the world, and the torch of knowledge behind him. And as that passes to the older generation or passes back to the younger generation, the older generation has a laurel wreath on his head representing accomplishment. And can anybody see what's in his hands? It's a tablet. It just happens to be made of stone. But how many people in here use tablets today? It's a pretty cool way to think about how tablets have always been the way that we've recorded and transported knowledge. In my day, tablets was actually a piece of paper. It could have been a chalkboard, just depends, a piece of bone, depended on when you went to school. So moving forward, we really start to see now they've added a dome to the building that was not there in the original drawings. And that large smokestack, which is on the left, That would be right at 2nd Street Southeast. That was because the Library of Congress actually produced its own electricity. We had coal-fired boilers in that area where there's a parking lot now, but everything came out where that smokestack was. And because the Thomas Jefferson Building was the first building to be built with electricity in place that was open to the public. So at the time, there was still a debate on whether direct current, proposed by Thomas Edison, was the most viable, or alternating current, which of course Westinghouse and Tesla were proposing. And the Chicago World's Fair of 1893, they had pretty much cemented that alternating current was more reliable. But guess which one the library and the Capitol went with? Direct current. So they have to have their own power, and they produce their own power either on site or with a coal-fired plant that's a few blocks away from Capitol Hill. And it's not until 1954 that the Library of Congress and our U.S. Capitol go on to alternating current. But we got there, but it just took a little while. That's when we went on to the DC's public grid system. As I mentioned earlier, everything is basically on the inside of the interior, just cladding, so it's just a veneer over. This is in the main reading room dome, so you can see the cast iron behind it, and then the plaster moldings behind that. This is in the Great Hall, and if you look closely down on the bottom level, you can see where the marble is being placed over the brick. So those are thin sheets of Italian Carrara marble. This is the marble workshop at the Library of Congress. You can see some of these little guys I'm going to talk about in a minute, known as putti. You can see some of the eagles. Where this workshop is located is on the north side of the building on the 2nd floor. So if we looked out the windows on the left, we'd be looking at the Supreme Court. And they are with some more of those figures as well. There are 15 different types of marble used in the Thomas Jefferson Building. Here's a picture of the main reading room as it's being built with its beautiful mahogany desks all the way around. And finally, in 1865, the outside of the building is considered completed. Now they just need to work on that inside decoration. The budget, we'll talk about it in a little while, but believe it or not, they're staying on time and under budget at this point. Now, the front of the Jefferson Building is Italian Renaissance. It's very much an Italian Renaissance building. Smith-Meyer Impels, many people like to compare it to the Paris Opera House. And I think you can see some of it, but everything that is in the Jefferson Building is very Italian Renaissance on the outside, and we say Beaux-Arts on the inside, much to do with Edward Pierce Casey's education in Paris. You walk into the Thomas Jefferson Building on the 1st floor, and you're immediately taken, everybody says, wow, because you have these great lights looking much like the Edison bulbs that were first used. Those are so retro now. And then the images of Minerva. Minerva is the patroness or the goddess of the Library of Congress. She is the Roman goddess of wisdom and defensive war. So you're first introduced to her here in the entry vestibule. The library takes the opportunity when this building opens from going from a legislative library to a de facto national library. That's not part of our name, but that's what we have become. And from the very beginning, they have exhibitions in these spaces. This is a set of prints that were used in the southwest area on the 2nd floor. that is where our suffrage exhibit is today. So we're using the building just as it was intended when it opened in 1897. Looking at some of the Italian influences on the inside, these young boys going up the side of the building, or side of the stairway, excuse me, are known as putti, P-U-T-T-I. Essentially, they're chairs without wings. And if you were in Italy, they'd be the guys that got to have a great time frolicking in fountains and having fun. But here in America, we're going to be industrious. So every single one of these guys has a job. So as we look forward, some of the jobs that they were, or vocations or hobbies, the bottom one on the left is a gardener. In his right hand, he has a shovel and a rake, and in his left hand, he has a watering can. The next one's a little harder. There are 3 butterflies, one on top of the net, one inside the net, and one by his left hand. He has a specimen bag over his shoulder and a grasshopper. So he's our entomologist. Why do we have an entomologist at the Library of Congress? Because I've mentioned Thomas Lincoln Casey. Well, he had 2 sons, Edward Pierce Casey and Thomas Lincoln Casey Jr. And Thomas Lincoln Casey Jr. was an entomologist. So if your dad's the builder and your brother's the designer, you at least get a putti on the staircase. The next one is our scholar with his mortarboard and book. And then in the middle there, we have a figure representing Asia with all that incredible silk wrapped around his arms. And then in between him and the globe is a little dragon, like we see at the Chinese New Year celebrations. The one on the right is representing Europe with a manuscript and a musical lyre. Now, these, as we go up, are 2 of the other putti that appear. The library is trying to show how much technology they have. And so here we have him represented with a phone. Yes, they used to be attached to the wall. And Alexander Graham Bell's papers are at the Library of Congress. And then we have our astronomer next. In the next section, as we move into the next room, we have Johann Gutenberg. And this is the evolution of the book murals. And this is when, in 1454, 1455, he first uses metal movable type in Mainz, Germany. We go from handwriting books, taking 3 years to write 1 Bible. Now they can produce 180 books in 1 printing, in the same time it used to take to produce 1. So he changes the world with that invention. The Library of Congress got its copy of a Gutenberg Bible in 1930. And what's so cool is this room had these murals, and then that's exactly where they put our copy of the Gutenberg Bible. It had been waiting for him for 33 years since the building had opened. So again, beautiful Italian Renaissance design. I know I'm running out of time, and I just wanted to point out for a minute, one of the things that is the most striking about the building is the combination of color. And the head decorator, artist, painter was Elmer Garnsey, and so I'd like to just give a shout out to him. We have these beautiful murals representing the 5 senses, and they're interchanged with murals of the Olympics. The modern Olympics restarted in 1896, and so in between our 5 senses, we have these beautiful murals representing the Olympics on the north side of the building, on the 2nd floor on the ceiling. Now, the artists had a sense of humor, so they had to put American sports in there too. So on the south side, they painted this one a baseball. So he has a bat, there's a base, there's a catcher's mask, and the pennant says CAC for the Capital Athletic Club. 56 of these triangles are throughout the building as well. Those are printer's marks, and that's the original copyright. So if you think of Random House, they always have that little house today. That's a very simplified version that doesn't count for anything, but people used to put their printer's marks inside the books. Aldus Manutius is an interesting character from the 16th century in Venice. He is a printer. He is the first one to develop italics. He's the first one to use the modern comma. He is the first one to develop paperback books. So they don't put a board on the outside when they put the vellum on. They just have a piece of vellum with the pages on the inside so people can start to carry books around. Knowledge is easy to pass on now. So I always like to give a little shout out to him. And Doubleday printers still use that as their printer's mark today. And then I found a picture of Aldus Manutius. Anyway, anything at the library you want to know about, just scratch the surface, and there's a lot more. Symbolism of the laurel wreaths with victory, and the lamp continuing burning of knowledge. And I am going to end here so I can make sure I take some questions. This is as you walk into the main reading room of the library, and it's government seated. And this is what people were supposed to think about a fair and balanced government as they walked into the main reading room. Government is seated, and in her right hand she has a plaque that says, "A government of the people, by the people, and for the people." Abraham Lincoln and Gettysburg Address. In her left hand, she has a golden rod representing the golden rule. They're to think about how you want to be treated is how you should treat others. The gentleman on the right with the reins is there to rein in government if it becomes too powerful. And the gentleman on the left has its sword still in its scabbard, ready to defend government if necessary, but to not be the aggressor. And that leads you into the main reading room, which I'm sure you have all seen in movies. Anyone done research in the library? Yay! Anyone who is 16 years of age can come and get a library card. You just have to have a valid driver's license or passport. And then you too can come into this room or our 19 other reading rooms between our 3 buildings on Capitol Hill. You don't have to be doing great research. I write my Christmas cards in there. I mean, it just is a place to feel enlightened, and that's what the Library of Congress is all about. All right, does anybody have any questions? No questions? All right, then you get to see my next slides. Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Well, it's called the Library of Congress because that's what it started out to be. We have never formally changed our title since the formation of the library in 1800. So we are the de facto National Library, but that's not part of our title. We are one of the only national libraries in the world that collects universally. So the Bibliothèque Nationale in France only collects materials in French and basically about French history and people of France. So we're a national library, but we're also really the world's library. We have one of the largest collections in the world, and especially internationally. Yes?
So you mentioned earlier how many books you get every day. So where are you putting those books because you've run out of room?
Yes. The library we bring into our collections 12,000. We actually get 15,000 books and our materials, photographs, prints, etc. 12,000 are decided to become part of the permanent collection. Most of those are now stored off-site. Up near Baltimore in an Army base that they've decommissioned part of it and let us have these beautiful warehouses that go way up into the sky and are climate controlled. Those things are all put in there, and those things, if it's a second copy or something that's not used very often, things go to off-site storage. So if you look at our catalog at loc.gov and go to catalog, when you bring your thing that you're looking up, it may say stored off-site. And if it says stored off-site, that means you need to give us 24 hours to get it back from near Baltimore down here. but they are constantly building new warehouses and storage for the materials. Yes, we do try to digitize things, but we're also the home of the U.S. copyright, so we have to obey copyright law. So things that were produced from 1924 on are still under copyright. And the things we do digitize are things like our two copies of the Gettysburg Address, the rough draft of the Declaration, the things that are really people want to see and can't always come to the library to see. So for instance, we've been on the 100th anniversary of the suffrage amendment, we have been digitizing all kinds of material on suffrage. So there's constant resources that will be digitized, but we're never, ever going to be able to digitize everything. Any other questions?
Can you tell us when we can hear this again and what the story is on tours of the Library of Congress where you can get this level of detail?
All right. All right. Well, first of all, how about I give you my phone number? Might as well. It's a nice small crowd. I'm not afraid to do that. So you can call me. I am Deputy Chief of our Visitor Engagement Office, and I am the person who has the privilege of recruiting and training our docents and other guides and visitor information desk volunteers at the library. We are getting ready to do some more trainings. We're not going to do our whole 14-week docent training this year, but we will again next year. This is my favorite topic to talk about, if you can't tell. So if you want to bring a group in, we can either schedule you with one of our excellent docents, such as Conrad right here. Did I get everything right today? Okay. Or you can go through with me as well. But I certainly appreciate your time and attention, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day at the National Book Festival. Thanks so much for attending.